All right. Welcome to another narration of mine. The necklace my grandma was wearing was keeping her safe in her cabin in the woods from the kids outside waiting to enter. Yo, what is up, guys? I've been sitting on this story for a long, long time, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I should ever share it. It's one of those things that once you put it out there, it becomes real again. But I've been seeing a lot of stuff on this sub about weird family secrets, and it reminded me of the summer I spent at my grandma's cabin back in 2014. Trust me when I say, this isn't your typical creepy house story. This is something much more messed up. My grandma lived deep in the woods of northern Michigan. I'm talking about a place where your GPS stops working 20 miles before you even hit her driveway. My parents were going through a nasty divorce at the time, and they basically dumped me there because they couldn't be in the same room long enough to figure out who was taking me for the summer. The first thing you noticed about my grandma, we called her Nana May, was that she was terrified. Not of the dark, or of bears, or of old age. She was terrified of something specific, and she never, ever took off this necklace. It wasn't a piece of jewelry you'd find at a store. It was a thick, braided cord of what looked like human hair, dirty blonde and gray, and hanging from it were these small, shriveled, brownish-gray lumps. When I first got close to her to give her a hug, the smell hit me. It was the smell of a butcher shop that had lost its power in the middle of July. Sweet, metallic, and rotting. "Nana, what is that?" I asked, gagging a little. She didn't smile. She just gripped the necklace until her knuckles turned white. "It's what keeps the house ours, Leo," she whispered. "And as long as I'm wearing it, and you're wearing yours, they can't come inside." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a smaller version of the necklace. The beads on it were smaller, and they felt soft and leathery, like dried-out fruit. But when I looked closer, I could see tiny, microscopic pores. I didn't want to touch it, but the look in her eyes... Guys, it was the look of a woman who was already dead, but just hadn't stopped breathing yet. I put it on. I still regret that every single day. The first few days were just weird. The cabin was old and felt like it was leaning. Nana May spent the whole day checking the locks. Not just the deadbolts, but she had these heavy iron bars she'd slide across every door. She even had shutters on the inside of the windows that she'd bolt shut at exactly 6 p.m. "Why are the windows bolted, Nana? It's like 80 degrees in here," I complained on the third night. She was standing by the wood stove, stirring a pot of something that smelled like vinegar and old copper. She froze. Because the children are outside, Leo. And they're hungry. I laughed. I thought she was just going senile. What children? We're 10 miles from the nearest neighbor. The ones who didn't get to grow up, she said, her voice completely flat. The ones who were left in the woods when the winters got too hard 100 years ago. They don't have bodies anymore, Leo. Just hunger. That night, I found out she wasn't crazy. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound. It wasn't a scary sound at first. It was the sound of a ball bouncing. Thud. 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 It was coming from the porch right outside my bedroom window. Then I heard the giggling. But it wasn't normal giggling. It sounded like someone was trying to laugh while their throat was full of wet sand. I crawled out of bed, my heart thumping against my ribs. I forgot the rules. I forgot what Nana said. I went to the window and peered through a tiny crack in the internal shutters. The moon was bright, and I could see the porch clearly. There were 3 of them. They looked like kids, maybe 5 or 6 years old, but their skin was the color of a wet sidewalk. They weren't wearing clothes. Their limbs were too long, like they'd been stretched on a rack, and their joints bent in ways that made my stomach turn. One of them was holding something that looked like a dead crow, tossing it up and catching it. Thud. Thud. Then the smallest one, a girl with no hair and eyes that were just empty, black pits, turned and looked directly at the crack in the shutter. She didn't have a nose, just 2 jagged holes in her face. She began to crawl up the wall of the cabin like an insect. I heard her fingers scratching against the wood. Scritch, scritch, scritch. She got to my window level, and I saw her face pressed against the glass. Her mouth opened, and I realized she didn't have teeth, just rows of sharp, jagged bone that looked like they'd been filed down. She started licking the glass. Her tongue was black and split down the middle. As she licked, I saw the necklace around my neck begin to glow? No, it wasn't glowing. It was pulsing. The little leather-like lumps were expanding and contracting, like a tiny heart was beating inside them. A foul, oily liquid started to seep out of the necklace and onto my chest. It burned like acid. I let out a choked-back scream, and the girl outside stopped. She pressed her ear to the glass and whispered something. It was my name. Leo, let us in. It's cold. We want to play with your skin. I backed away, tripping over a rug, and that's when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I screamed for real this time, turning around to see Nana May. She wasn't wearing her nightgown. She was wearing a heavy leather coat, and she was holding a kitchen knife. Don't listen to them, she hissed, her eyes wide and bloodshot. The necklace is feeding. It's the only thing they're afraid of, the smell of their own kind. I looked at the necklace again, the realization hitting me like a freight train. The beads on the cord. They weren't fruit. They weren't wood. They were ears. Dried, shriveled, human ears. And as the girl outside started slamming her head against the window, the glass beginning to spiderweb, I realized that the necklace wasn't just a charm. It was a trophy. And the only reason we were safe was because Nana May had been collecting from the kids outside for decades. But the girl's headbutting was getting louder. Crack. Crack. "Nana," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "The glass is breaking." She just looked at me and gripped her knife. "Then we'll just have to add to your necklace tonight, won't we?" The glass didn't just break. It exploded inward. It wasn't like a rock hit it. It was like the pressure from outside just became too much for the cabin to hold back. Shards of glass sprayed across my floor, and one of them sliced right through my calf. I didn't even feel the pain at first, because the cold that rushed into the room it wasn't normal cold. It felt like the air itself was dead. The girl, the thing that looked like a girl, didn't climb in. She poured in. Her bones made these wet snapping sounds, like someone breaking dry celery stalks, wrapped in wet leather. She landed on the floor in a heap of gray, translucent skin and tangled limbs. She was smaller than I thought, but her head was huge, pulsating with blue veins that looked like they were filled with ink. She didn't have hair, just these patches of what looked like mold growing out of her scalp. And the smell. Imagine a trash can full of old fish and used bandages. That was her. "Leo," she gurgled. She was looking at me, but her eyes weren't moving together. One was fixed on my face, and the other was wandering toward the necklace around my neck. "Give it back. It's heavy. Give us back our pieces." I was backed into the corner, clutching the necklace. The beads, the ears, were vibrating now. They were sucking the heat right out of my chest. I looked down and saw that the oily liquid seeping out of them was turning a dark, bruised purple. It was staining my shirt, and where it touched my skin, it felt like I was being branded with a hot iron. Then Nana May moved. For an 80-year-old woman, she moved with this terrifying, jerky speed. She didn't scream. She didn't pray. She just lunged. She grabbed the girl thing by the throat with one hand, and I heard the sound of wind being choked out of a pair of punctured lungs. "You don't get this one," Nana hissed. Her voice didn't even sound like hers anymore. It was deep, rattling, and sounded like two stones grinding together. This one is mine. Go back to the dirt, you little leech. The girl thing started clawing at Nana's arms. Her fingernails were long, yellow, and jagged, like broken seashells. She was ripping chunks of Nana's leather coat away, and I saw something that made me want to throw up. Underneath the coat, Nana's skin was covered in these things. They looked like small, puckered mouths that had been sewn shut with fishing line. Dozens of them, all over her arms and shoulders. And as the girl thing scratched her, those mouths started to twitch. Nana May didn't flinch. She took the kitchen knife, the one that looked like it had been sharpened so many times, the blade was just a thin sliver of steel. And she didn't stab the girl. She carved. She went for the side of the thing's head. I had to look away, but I couldn't shut out the sound. It sounded like someone slicing through a thick, wet orange peel. The girl thing let out a sound that wasn't a scream. It was a high-pitched whistle, like steam escaping a kettle. "Leo, hold her legs," Nana barked. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I was watching my grandmother, this woman who used to bake me blueberry muffins, pinned a monster to the floor and began to surgically remove its ear while it was still twitching. "Leo! Now!" I scrambled forward, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip anything. I grabbed the thing's legs. They felt like cold, wet sausages. The skin was slimy, and it felt like there was no muscle underneath, just soft, jelly-like cartilage. The thing kicked, and its foot caught me in the chest, knocking the wind out of me. But Nana was faster. She finished the cut with a wet pop. She held up the fresh bead. It was gray, dripping with a thick, clear fluid that looked like egg whites. The girl thing suddenly went limp. Not dead, but like its battery had been pulled out. It shriveled, its skin folding in on itself until it looked like a pile of discarded laundry. Nana May didn't waste a second. She took a needle and some of that hair-braided cord from her pocket. Right there, on the floor of my bedroom, with the wind howling through the broken window, she threaded the new ear onto the cord. As soon as the needle pierced the gray flesh, the bead let out a tiny, microscopic shriek. Nana May stood up, panting, her face covered in that clear, sticky fluid. She looked at me, and for a second, I didn't recognize her. Her eyes were completely black. The pupils had swallowed the irises whole. "We have to fix the window," she said, her voice trembling. "The smell of fresh harvest. It's like a dinner bell for the ones still in the trees. They'll be coming for their sister now." I looked out the broken window, past the porch and into the tree line. Guys, there weren't just 3 of them anymore. The woods were glowing with dozens of those empty, black pit eyes. They were perched in the branches like vultures, their long, pale limbs hanging down, swaying in the breeze. And then they all started to whistle. The same high-pitched tea kettle sound. Nana May grabbed my arm, her grip like a vice. "The necklace, Leo. Check the necklace. Is it still pulsing?" I looked down. The ears on my chest weren't just pulsing anymore. They were opening. The little puckered holes I thought were pores were actually tiny, hungry mouths. And they were starting to bite into my skin. "Nana," I sobbed, "it's eating me." She didn't look surprised. She just started dragging me toward the kitchen. "It's a trade, Leo. A little bit of you to keep all of them out. But we're out of time. They're not waiting for the door anymore." At that exact moment, we heard a heavy thud on the roof. Then another, and another. It sounded like giant hailstones were hitting the cabin. But I knew better. They were dropping from the trees. "Yo, what is up, guys? We're back. I'm seeing a lot of you asking why I didn't just run. You have to understand. Where was I going to go? It was pitch black, miles of dense woods, and those things were literally perched in the trees like overgrown, hairless crows. If I left that cabin, I was dead in seconds. I was trapped between a grandmother who was harvesting body parts and a pack of monsters that wanted their pieces back. The sound on the roof was the worst part. It wasn't just footsteps. It sounded like heavy, wet bags of meat being dropped from 40 feet up. Splat. Drap. Splat. The ceiling joists were actually groaning under the weight. Nana May dragged me into the kitchen, and the smell there was even worse. She had the wood stove cranking, even though it was already sweltering. On top of the stove was a massive iron pot, and inside she was melting down these thick, yellow slabs of what looked like animal fat. But it had hair in it. Human hair. "Nana, my chest," I gasped, pulling at the collar of my shirt. "The necklace. It's digging in." She didn't even look at me. She was focused on the ceiling. "Don't touch it, Leo. If you pull it off, the scent of your living blood will fill this room, and they'll stop playing with the roof and just come through the walls. The necklace has to eat so it can scream for us." I looked down inside my shirt, and guys, I almost fainted. The 3 ears on my cord had latched onto my skin. They weren't just sitting there. They had buried their jagged edges into my chest. Small, dark bruises were spreading out from where they bit me, and I could feel a rhythmic sucking sensation, like they were drinking from my veins. The oily liquid was now bright red, They were filtering my blood. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from above. A pale, gray hand, if you can even call it that, punched through the plaster of the kitchen ceiling. It didn't have fingernails, just raw, exposed bone where the tips should be. The hand started wiggling around, feeling the air, searching for something to grab. Then, that clear, egg-white fluid started dripping from the hole. It hit the hot wood stove and sizzled, releasing a cloud of steam that smelled like a dental office, nitrous oxide, and burning bone. "They're finding the soft spots," Nana whispered. She grabbed a ladle of the melted fat and threw it toward the hole in the ceiling. The scream that came from the roof was so loud, it made my ears bleed. It wasn't a human scream. It sounded like 1,000 cicadas, all dying at once. The hand retracted so fast, it took a chunk of the ceiling with it, and I heard the thing rolling down the slope of the roof until it hit the ground with a wet thud. But Nana wasn't relieved. She looked at the pot of fat and then at me. "It's not enough. The fat is old. It's lost its power. We need something fresh to seal the gaps." She reached out and gripped my hand. Her skin felt like sandpaper, and her eyes were darting around the room like she was looking for a tool. "Leo, do you love your Nana?" "Of course, Nana. But what?" "Then you need to understand the cycle," she said, her voice getting eerily calm. "These kids, they weren't just left here. My grandfather, your great-great-grandfather, he brought them here. He thought he could breed something that would guard the land. But they don't guard. They just wait. And every generation, we have to pay the landlord to keep the lease." She walked over to a small cupboard I had never seen her open. She pulled out a jar. Inside was a tongue, a full human tongue, preserved in some kind of gray brine. "The necklace keeps them out because it tells them we've already taken what they want," she explained, holding the jar up to the light. "But when they get this hungry, a few ears won't do. They want the voice. They want to be able to speak so they can call the others." The scratching on the walls started then. It wasn't just the roof anymore. They were under the floorboards. I could feel the wood vibrating under my sneakers. Scratch, scratch, scratch. They were trying to find a way to get under us. "Leo," Nana said, unscrewing the jar. The smell of the brine made my eyes water. It was like pure ammonia. "I'm going to need you to hold the door to the cellar. Don't let the floorboards lift. No matter what you hear or what you feel touching your ankles, you do not move." She handed me the heavy iron fire poker. I stood over the cellar trap door, my legs shaking so hard I thought I'd collapse. Then the whispering started, not from outside, from inside the cellar. "Leo," the voice said. It sounded exactly like my mom. "Leo, it's so dark down here. She's hurting me, Leo. Open the door. Please, baby. It's Mom." I knew my mom was 300 miles away in a lawyer's office. I knew it, but the voice was perfect. It had the same hitch in the breath when she was about to cry. It had the same way of saying my name. "Don't listen!" Nana screamed as she began smearing the gray brine around the edges of the kitchen. "It's the tongue! It's mimicry! They steal the voices of the ones they've tasted." Just then, the trap door I was standing on slammed upward. It hit me so hard, I flew back against the cabinets. A head popped out of the darkness of the cellar. It didn't have a face, just a smooth, gray surface of skin where the features should be, except for a giant, vertical slit that ran from the top of its forehead down to its neck. The slit opened, and inside were hundreds of tiny, vibrating vocal cords. "Leo, please! It hurts!" The thing screamed in my mother's voice, while its body, a twisted, skeletal mess of gray limbs, started crawling out of the hole. Nana May didn't hesitate. She threw the contents of the jar, the tongue, right into the open slit of the creature. The creature froze. The vertical mouth clamped shut on the tongue. It started making this horrific gulping sound, its throat expanding and contracting as it tried to swallow the preserved meat. But while it was distracted, Nana May grabbed the fire poker I had dropped. She didn't hit the creature. She shoved the poker into the wood stove until the tip was glowing white hot. "Hold it down," she yelled at me. I don't know where the courage came from. Maybe it was just pure survival instinct. But I jumped on the thing's back. It felt like holding on to a bag of wet stones. It was freezing cold, and the smell of rot was so thick I had to breathe through my shirt. Nana May took the white-hot poker and pressed it against the creature's face, right over the slit. The sound of searing flesh filled the kitchen. The creature didn't scream this time. It just made a low, vibrating hum that made my teeth ache. Smoke, thick and black, filled the room. But as the creature thrashed, the necklace around my neck went insane. The ears started biting deeper, tearing through my skin, trying to get to my collarbone. I felt a sharp, stabbing pain as one of the teeth on the necklace hit bone. I screamed, and as I did, the creature stopped fighting. It looked up at me, even though it had no eyes, and the slit in its face opened just a tiny bit. "Almost brothers," it whispered. Not in my mom's voice, in my voice. Nana May kicked the thing back into the cellar and slammed the door, bolting it with a heavy iron bar. She was covered in soot and gray slime, panting like a dying animal. "It's not over," she wheezed, looking at my chest. The necklace was now glowing a dull, angry red, and the blood was soaked all the way down to my waist. "The necklace. It's tasted them now, Leo. It's not protecting you anymore. It's changing you so you can live outside with them." I looked at my hands. My fingernails were turning yellow and jagged. By the time the sun started to peek through the trees, the kids had retreated back into the deep shadows, but they didn't go far. I could see their pale, spindly legs hanging from the pine branches, swinging back and forth like they were bored. My chest was a mess. The necklace had basically fused with my skin. The 3 gray ears were no longer just hanging there. They had burrowed halfway into my pectoral muscles. Every time I breathed, I could feel the cartilage of those dead ears grinding against my ribs. And like I said, my fingernails were changing. They were thick, yellow, and curved. And the skin around the cuticles was turning that same bruised gray color as the things outside. "Come on," Nana May said. Her voice was thin, like paper tearing. "Before the sun gets high, the necklace is greedy. If we don't reset it, it'll finish the job by noon." She led me out the back door. The air was heavy and damp, smelling like wet earth and something metallic. We walked to a small, windowless shed about 50 yards from the cabin. The door was wrapped in heavy iron chains. When she unlocked it and pulled the door open, the smell hit me like a physical punch. It wasn't just rot. It was the smell of a bathroom that hadn't been cleaned in a decade, mixed with industrial strength bleach. Inside, there weren't any lawn mowers or rakes. There were hooks hanging from the ceiling, and on those hooks were what looked like pelts. They were long, thin straw of that gray, translucent skin. Some of them still had the puckered mouths I saw on Nana's arms. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to a rusted metal chair in the center of the room. Underneath the chair was a drain in the concrete floor, stained a dark, permanent rust color. I sat. I was too weak to fight. The necklace was draining me, sucking the energy right out of my marrow. Nana May went to a workbench and picked up a pair of heavy-duty pliers and a container of coarse rock salt. "The necklace thinks you're one of them now," she said, her back to me. "It's trying to hollow you out to make room for the hunger. We have to remind it that you're still meat. We have to make you hurt so much that the necklace gets overwhelmed and lets go." She didn't give me a choice. She didn't give me anything for the pain. She grabbed my left hand. Her grip was like a lobster claw. She took the pliers and clamped them onto my thumb, the one where the nail had turned the yellowest. "Keep your mouth open," she whispered. "If you bite your tongue off, the kids will use it to mock you for eternity." Then she pulled. Guys, I can't even describe the sound. It wasn't a snap. It was a slow, wet, peeling sound. I felt every single nerve ending in my thumb scream at once. I tried to pull away, but Nana May held my arm down with a strength that was definitely not human. She ripped the entire nail out, root and all. I let out a sound that wasn't even a scream. It was a guttural, primal howl. But she wasn't done. Before the blood could even start to pool, she grabbed a handful of that coarse rock salt and slammed it directly onto the raw, exposed nerves of my thumb bed. I think I blacked out for a second. The pain was so intense, it turned my vision white. My heart was slamming against my ribs, and that's when I felt it. The necklace, the ears on my chest reacted to my agony. They started to shrivel. They hated the salt, and they hated the shock of my actual human pain. They began to pull their jagged edges out of my chest, making these little wet sucking noises as they detached from my muscles. But Nana May wasn't stopping at one. "It's still holding on to the bone, Leo," she said, her face inches from mine. She looked possessed. "We have to do the others." For the next hour, it was a blur of agony. The sound of the pliers, the sting of the salt, and the sight of my own blood splashing onto the concrete drain. She did 4 more fingers. By the end, my hand looked like a piece of raw steak that had been dragged through a gravel pit. But the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the audience. I looked toward the open door of the shed. The kids were standing just outside the threshold. They couldn't come in because of the salt Nana had spread across the doorway. But they were watching. They were leaning forward, their long, pale necks stretching out, their empty black eyes fixed on my bleeding hand. The smallest one, the girl from the window, was mimicking me. Every time I screamed, she would open her jagged, toothless mouth and make the exact same sound, perfectly synced with mine. They weren't just watching. They were feeding on the sound of it. Finally, the necklace fell off. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, looking like a dead, bloated tick. It was no longer gray. It was a deep, sickly crimson, engorged with my blood. Nana May picked it up with a pair of tongs and dropped it into a jar of that gray brine. "There," she panted, wiping the sweat and blood from her forehead. "It's full now. It won't bother you for the rest of the summer." I looked down at my chest. There were 3 deep, circular holes where the ears had been. I could see the white of my own ribs through the wounds. "Nana," I wheezed, my voice almost gone. "Why? Why do you stay here? Why do we have to do this?" She looked at the pelts hanging from the ceiling, and then back at me. A single tear tracked through the gray slime on her cheek. "Because, Leo, if we don't keep them busy with us, they'll go looking for the rest of the world. We're the cork in the bottle, and someone has to keep the necklace heavy." She then reached into her pocket and pulled out a fresh, clean cord. This one didn't have ears. It had something else. They looked like small, dried-out tongues. "Now," she said, stepping toward me with the new necklace, "we have to seal the holes in your chest. And the only way to do that is to give them something to talk about." That night, the whistling started again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from inside my own chest. A lot of you are asking if I ever called the police or if I went to a hospital. The truth is, when you experience something that fundamentally breaks your understanding of how the world works, you don't call 911. You just run until your legs give out. After the shed, Nana May dragged me back to the cabin. My hand was wrapped in dirty burlap sacks, and the new necklace, the one with the dried tongues, was heavy against my chest. The holes where the ears had been were now plugged by these tongues. They didn't bite like the ears did. They merged. It felt like I had 3 extra hearts beating inside my torso, all of them out of sync with my own. "Your father is coming, Leo," Nana said, her voice sounding like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "I called him on the landline. I told him you were sick. You have to leave before the sun goes down again." I should have been happy, but I looked at her and felt nothing but cold terror. She was sitting in her rocking chair, but she wasn't rocking. She was vibrating. The mouths on her arms were all open now, and they were making a low, rhythmic humming sound, like a hive of bees. "Nana, come with me," I pleaded. "We can get help. We can get you away from this place." She finally looked at me, and guys, her face was gone. The skin had smoothed over where her eyes and nose used to be. She was becoming just like the kids outside. The only thing left was her mouth, and it was stretched into a wide, permanent grin that reached her ears. "I can't leave the crop, Leo," she whispered through the grin. "Someone has to stay to make sure they don't get too loud. If the forest goes quiet, that's when the world should be scared." Around 4 p.m., my dad's old station wagon pulled into the gravel driveway. I've never been so happy to see that rusted out piece of junk in my life. He hopped out, looking annoyed and tired, probably ready to yell at me for getting sick and ruining his weekend. He didn't even make it to the porch. He stopped dead when he saw the cabin. From his perspective, the cabin must have looked like it was covered in gray moss. But I knew better. The kids were draped over the roof, hanging from the gutters, and peeking out from under the porch boards. They weren't attacking. They were just waiting. They were watching my dad like he was a delivery driver, bringing a hot meal. "Leo, get in the car, now!" my dad screamed. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look at Nana. He saw the wrongness of the place, and his survival instinct finally kicked in. I bolted. I didn't grab my bag. I didn't say goodbye. I ran toward the car, the burlap on my hand dripping a trail of salty blood. As I jumped into the passenger seat, I looked back at the porch. Nana May was standing there. She had taken off her leather coat. Her entire body was covered in those puckered mouths, and every single one of them was wide open, tasting the air. The kids, the gray things, started to swarm around her. They weren't hurting her. They were hugging her. They were pressing their featureless faces against her skin, and she was petting their bald, leathery heads like they were her own grandchildren. My dad floored it. The tires spun on the gravel, and we fishtailed out of the driveway. He was hyperventilating, his hands white on the steering wheel. "What was that, Leo? What happened to her face? What were those things?" I couldn't answer. I just stared straight ahead, clutching my chest. But then, as we hit the main road and the cabin disappeared into the trees, I did something I shouldn't have done. I looked in the rearview mirror. In the distance, standing in the middle of the road, was the girl thing, the one from my window. She wasn't chasing us. She was standing perfectly still, waving. And as I watched her, I felt a sharp, electric jolt in my chest. The 3 tongues on my necklace, they started to move. They weren't just hanging there anymore. They pushed through the burlap of my shirt, and I realized they were growing. They were rooting into my lungs. And then the sound started. It wasn't a whistle this time. It was a voice, my voice, but it wasn't coming from my mouth. It was coming from the holes in my chest. "Don't worry, Leo," the voice whispered from inside my own body. "We're almost home." I looked at my dad, but he didn't hear it. He was too busy sobbing and driving. I looked down at my hand. The fingernails weren't just yellow anymore. They were gone. In their place were the same raw, exposed bone tips I had seen on the hand that broke through the ceiling. I'm 24 now. My dad passed away a few years ago. Cancer, they said. but I know it was the stress of what he saw. I live in a city now, in a high-rise apartment with no trees for miles. I keep the lights on 24/7. I still wear the necklace. I have to. If I take it off, the holes in my chest start to scream, and the neighbors start knocking on the walls, asking who I have trapped in here. Every morning, I have to feed them. I take a needle and I prick my finger, letting a few drops of blood fall onto each of the 3 tongues. They lap it up like thirsty dogs. And every night, I look in the mirror and I see my skin getting a little bit smoother, a little bit grayer. The worst part isn't the physical change, though. The worst part is the dreams. In my dreams, I'm back at the cabin. I'm sitting on the porch next to Nana May. We're watching the woods, and we're waiting. We're waiting for the next generation of our family to come visit for the summer. Because the necklace is getting hungry again, and it's tired of the taste of my blood. It wants something fresh. That's the truth of what happened that summer. I know it's a lot to process, and honestly, I feel a little better finally getting it out there. Just, if you have a relative living deep in the woods, and they tell you to wear a piece of lucky jewelry, maybe just stay at a hotel instead.